Thank you very much. Thank you very much, dear organizers, dear participants, for organizing and inviting this very, I think, very important conference, which speaks about cohesion, which speaks about dialogue. So, as a person who is interested in cultural identity particularly, and it became very important to speak about the cultures. And when you come to the cultures, it's important to speak about how the cultures are represented. And they're always represented by symbols. And the symbols are best way to see not only the modern, but also the historical past. What was the identity of the people of the distant past in Central Asia, in India, for example. So it came that that's how this topic came into my research interest, the zoomorphic style of Eurasian steppe and Tillya-Tepe artifacts. I found it interesting to see how these cross-cultural dialogues are. I expressed what were the cross-cultural exchanges between Central Asia and India during the very crucial period of so-called Axis age, the end of first millennium before Common Era BC and the beginning of first millennium CE, when some different religions flourished, appeared, and migration started taking place across the Eurasian continents. So how were the plural forms of these artistic expressions in the particularly pre-Kushana and early Kushana period, and these issues I would like to discuss using the case of so-called Saka zoomorphic style. Why particularly this style had been chosen by me, because this is briefly context of my presentation. I don't know how to make. I will try my best to do it within 10 minutes. So here I will just speak about space. Today we are told that spaces, cultures, countries should be defined not only by territorial and political entities, but rather than by geographical and cultural ones. So zoomorphic and particular any historical part of any country, and particularly zoomorphic style of art, gives us a very splendid opportunity to speak about this geocultural affiliation, so to say. So how this what is the zoomorphic art of Central Asia is, why Sakas, and why this topic is important, particularly for modern Kazakhstan, because we may see that today's in the purely contemporary forms of how the nation building takes place in our country, those parts of our distant past plays enormous role. And then I will come to the Tillya-Tepe cross-culture mold, and as a case of these relations between India and Central Asia. So again, the concept of space, this is a very intriguing and not defined, fixed at all, the concept of the Central Asia, whether it is a Middle Asia, and this concept depends on the geography, on the history, on the actors, on the participants, and on the context. So within different stages of time, and here I used the definition of UNESCO in the Book of History of Civilizations for Central Asia in 1978, they defined the Central Asia very broadly in historical terms, not in a political ones. As 5 countries of so-called Middle Asia, former Middle Asia, now Central Asia, the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region of modern China, or so-called Eastern Turkestan, as a part of Afghanistan, northern part of Hindu Kush, and also what we historically know as the northern and central Bactria, and Mongolia, southern Siberia, Altai of Russia, northern parts of India and Pakistan. So as per UNESCO, this could be defined, but within even this definition, we may find some historical cultural areas or geographically cultural areas that had been defined by the participants' time and the context. This is, we may, if we adhere to Central Asia, we may speak about either Turano, Bactria, Margiana, Sogdiana, or Sogto, Khwarezm, Fergana, Zhetesu, Deshta Kipchak, Great Steppe or Kazakh Steppe, Mogolistan, Kashgar, or Uiguria. Now let's come to the Sakas tribe, which perhaps you know, and just let me briefly remind you that those tribes which mainly were known in the historical sources, particularly in Greek one, are the Scythians. Sometimes it is called Sakas, but the little bit slight differentiation of this. So you could see that these tribes stretched from the far East Asia towards the Central Europe, towards the Hungarian steppes, and crossing all these plains and areas because of the way of life, economic and social way of life, which allowed them to cover the huge spaces by riding horses. They were nomads, and for nomads, having green grass is important. And if you could see geographically, this area is a plain which is restricted by the either northern and southern part, or eastern and western, by the mountains. So these are migrations of Scythian tribes that took place throughout the first millennium BC, and that had important influence on the area of and the history of all other nations or ethnic groups that evolved and appeared or disappeared at this period. So the Scythians of the Pontic or Black Sea were known, which had been known to Greeks mostly because they communicated, traded with them as the Scythians, whereas the eastern part of those tribal federations, let us say so, confederations, tribal units, they were known as the Sakas. So I will speak about those Sakas that have been marked their presence particularly in those Eurasian steppe, in those places. Huge major archaeological sites and mounds of the Sakas could be found in Arjan 1 and 2 in Tuva in Russia. That is the the eldest as of now found or fixed mold that refers to the 9th, 7th century before BCE. So in Pazarik Altai in Russia, and Issyk Kurgan in southern Kazakhstan, Tasmola in central Kazakhstan, Beryl also in eastern Kazakhstan, Tillya-Tepe in northern Afghanistan, and Yerekesheva, this is the nearest findings that had took place in just 2 years back, 2020, in eastern Kazakhstan as well. So as you see, those territories of most central and eastern and southern part of Kazakhstan, modern day Kazakhstan, were covered by those molds, and they were very indicative of the migrations of these Scythian or Sakas migrations then from the so-called Yamnai culture about 3,300 BC. Then there is two branches went to the east, to the west, to the east towards Tuva Altai, what we may found in southeastern Kazakhstan. Then from east they migrated to west, and as I told you, they were known in Central Europe as Scythia, and pushed by migrations of other Yuezhi and Hunus tribe later, the 2nd century CE. They have been marginalized. I came to the south towards modern Afghanistan and India. So this is how they found themselves as the Indo-Scythians kingdoms in the here. Just better to show in this. This is how Saka kingdoms in Sakastan left the imprint in the modern Afghanistan, which is also Seistan province, which is also called Sakastan, as a legacy of those tribes. And also, as here you can see, as in the Scythians, they found especially their presence in Mathura, visible in Mathura art in Ujjaina, in the northern and western part of India. So just the Sakas were Iranians of Iranian origin. They spoke Khatanese Saka dialect, which is also Eastern Iranian dialect, and this script was by Kharoshki, which is known in India, and most of those scripts had been found in modern Khotan, the early Buddhist kingdom of Khotan in early centuries CE. So here we could say that these inscriptions, as I told you, have been these inscriptions which you see here on the balls had been found in Issyk-Kurgan, and it says that this vessel should hold wine of grapes, added cooked food, so much to the mortal, then added cooked fresh butter on. So it's a sort of recipe that could be done during the performance of some religious rituals. When it comes to the zoomorphic style itself, it was associated with different religious beliefs. That was a pluralism of religious beliefs. At that time, we may see different cults of nature, especially solar, lunar cults, of course, zoomorphic cults, animism and magic, then totemism, fetishism, and shamanism. Those were religions that were associated with this specific ways of life, and they were represented by the very bright animalism and forms with a relatively small size, with a special curvilinear style, and with a variety of techniques. Here I'll just briefly will go through these elements. Here you see these bronze ceremonial standards which had been found in Alacahoyuk in central northern eastern part of modern Turkey, where you could see these standards represented not only solar cult but also the so-called swastika and swastika, which had been associated with the cults of sun, and also became a very prominent artifact, I mean actually quite rare artifact, which speaks about the migrations and the possibility of cross-cultural exchanges and influences. The same other elements of the solar sun animal deities, because sun played a very important role in the zoomorphic styles, also from Alacahoyuk. This is also the circles as a solar symbolism on sacred animals. This is I'll just briefly go through. And another representation of sun deer stones, which became a very sacred one, especially in the steppe area, particularly found in Mongolia and in eastern part of Kazakhstan, which speaks about this also representation of zoomorphic style when there is depiction of deer which had been associated with the sun. So it is called sun deer. That's why deer stone is a commemoration of those important leaders of the tribes that was in their area. This also could be found on the rock in the form of horses, also in different parts of the Kazakhstan, I'm telling you. And the images of animals in zoomorphic style became important for the several reasons. They were could be found on the streets, waist plates or plugs of the clothes, of the harness, saddles, weapons, and scenes of the torment struggle, which had been a very expressive style by itself. And also it has a protective symbolism, meaning that it protected the person, rider, and his horse, because animals was also a totemic animals. Here you can see the very famous plaques from found in northern Crimea, in now today it's Russia, in referring to the 4th century, which Greeks saw, and there was Scythian. And also you may find these elements of horses. Oops, sorry. This is a saddle. Yes. This is a very important saddle, which applique saddle cover, 3rd century before Common Era, where you can find the elements of shamanism, animism, and totemism through all these magic rituals which had been associated with. I'll just briefly go through. I cannot understand. It's kind of, yeah, this saddle. And this is the sun horse, which was considered as a sacred animal of the circus. Particularly, you may be surprised why the horns had been the horse has been depicted with horn, but that was an element of the importance of the sun dwelling when some particular animals was regarded as the sun animals. And here also a little bit some slow and press twice and it comes later. Okay, I will just skip, I think, some elements. Here you may see these very beautiful zoomorphic pectorals and chest plate shaped as a coiled panther. The upper one from the Crimea area and the lower one from the Arjan Tuva in Altai, in Tuva, in modern Russia. This is just a representation. I'm telling you this just to give you a glimpse on the types of the zoomorphic style that had been depicted with the precision and with the very numerous skills of the master. These are made of gold and silver mainly, especially this golden pectoral, which of some Sarkos queen, let's say. So when it comes to Tillya-Tepe, this is a burial mound which had been found in the northern Afghanistan by the Soviet Afghanistan archaeological expedition in 1978, and by itself it became very unique in the sense that it gives us the sense of what type of art and cross-cultural connections took place at that period. That was the pre-Kushan and early Kushan period when the Sarkos moved down towards the south, towards the Indian subcontinent. And when, for example, the influences of ancient Greek, of Central Asian itself, and Indian influence became a manifestation of these cross-cultural relations of that period. This just also representations of this beautifully made, like this Tillya-Tepe crown. Yes, I'm just completed. And this also necklace, which represents, still has the idea of this old Sarkos necklaces, but somehow now became shaped in a more voluminous form. Yes, like this. I'm just to compare, to correlate. And this representation of the Buddha with which pushing the will of the law, which is now in Kabul Museum, perhaps a unique one because it is perhaps one of the first representation of Buddha in anthropomorphic form. Because usually, especially in India, before Buddhism started spreading all through Central Asia towards China and then Japan, up to Korea and Japan, Buddha was represented through just symbolic like forms like petals and lotus or some foods. But this is at this period of second century CE, when Buddha became anthropomorphized. And this also was followed later by the Gandhara art, when it gave purely anthropomorphic forms and also the local elements of its, and bodhisattvas as well, as elements of the local already early Kushana art. So the masculinity, the fighters, the warriors, the protectors of the faith, rather than more intuitive and inward-looking view. And also here the Buddha is represented, and these devotees standing, it looks like a Sarkos, because Sarkos became, when they migrated towards the South India, they became devotees of Buddhism, sharp devotees. And so this on the left, there is Vajrayana, who was invisible at Buddha's attendants, but here it became very visible, and Vajrapani, sorry. And he is represented here in the form of Heracles, the Greek god's hero, which, here you can see how these cross-cultural penetrations took place. And those Atlantes, which are very much not canonical form like they used to be represented in Greek-Roman art, but they are just in so-called Central Asian art. So this is a briefly, I just wanted to tell that those representations which we could have through the meaning, through the symbols of the art, gives us a sort of glimpse into the past, because art is this field which managed to accumulate all information of all cultural systems. Through art, culture survives, and being expanded, they become civilization. And today also we are told that civilizations, I mean, if we speak about the unity of the world, we just need to see as all of these different manifestations, as all different cultural manifestations, as a different part of the one being whole. Thank you very much.